Hey, how's it going? So, I have a lighting setup for recording. That's why you can see the shadows behind me there. Cold Steel 1. I might just do this lighting setup from now on, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. Certainly means I can do more recordings now, but that all depends on how long this takes me. So here we are at Cold Steel 1. So I'm just going to go ahead and show this because although I did do some rewriting of my notes here, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, more like 6 and a bit, not unlike how it was with Sky 1. And if you want to count the non-repeats, then it is basically 1, 2, 3, 5 pages of notes. So, Trails of Cold Steel. Let's get the thing that I mentioned on the stream out of the two things I mentioned on the stream right at the beginning, right out of the way right now. No, I am not looking at the Crossbell games for this particular run. Okay? And if you're wondering why, the answer is actually very simple. I am not. The legality is too. How do I put this? Weird for me. Because on the one hand, yes, I would be playing, I would be buying the actual game, but I wouldn't really have access to anything. The problem is effectively to do it in the nicest most legal way possible that I would have available to me, I would have to effectively use what most sources indicate is an inferior translation of the Crossbell games. And considering that the news that the fan group the Geofront have actually been hired by NIS America to help with the localization of the Crossbell games, yeah, needless to say, I'm just going to go ahead and say no. Besides, I really wanted to get to this one. So, so let's go ahead and do that. And now I realize that my webcam is too low. Okay, that's better. It's not great, but it's better. Or too high. It was too high. Whatever. Point is, I got a lot of notes, and I'm not going to do this. So, this is the game that got me into the Legend of Heroes series. I'm just going to start with that. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why this one, right? You played Sky 1 before. Yes, but I never got far in Sky 1. And I always wondered about that, to be honest. Why was Cold Steel 1 the one that I played so hard? Why was Cold Steel 1 the one that that I came back to so often? I think the way I will phrase it is it's the difference between Kingdom Hearts 1 between Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2. See, with Kingdom Hearts 1, every time I replay Kingdom Hearts 1, which I have done multiple times for the record, I keep getting reminded of why I keep putting Kingdom Hearts 1 down. And my biggest point as to why is Kingdom Hearts 1, and I know a bunch of Kingdom Hearts fans are probably going to want to shoot me for this, but whatever. Kingdom Hearts 1 is clunky. Very clunky. It has so many rough spots that it's just like, oh my god. For example, the platforming in that game, if you can even fucking call that platforming, is actively against you the entire time in that game, right? And that's how I felt with like every trash encounter right? Because every trash encounter in Sky 1 specifically felt like it was just a waste of my goddamn time. Like I wasn't gaining anything. By contrast, I went through this game and on New Game Plus and I leveled up and I leveled Reen up, what was it, like 3 times with mostly trash and boss exp. Because this game actually does have scaling exp. I was going to praise it for not having scaling exp, but no, what it does is it has scaling exp with multipliers, which mitigates the scaling my issues with scaling exp just beautifully, right? If you'll recall from my Sky 1 video, from my Sky videos, my problem with scaling exp was I I wish I still had the VODs for this, but my problem with scaling exp what is and always was uh, that there was a cap, that there was an artificial cap to how useful that is, right? Now, it's not the worst scaling exp I've ever seen in my life. That honor goes to, so far, goes to Paper Mario 1 on the N64, because there is a point where Paper Mario 1, if you stay in an area too long, will literally start giving you 0 exp. And that is fucking disgusting. I hate that very idea, especially considering how much they tried to drag the numbers down. I mean, if you want to make it so that the level cap is 20 and it takes me 100 battles to level up even once, and it's because one level up is substantial, I'm okay with that. But don't rip the ability for me to over level to hell and back, heck, away from me. All you're gonna do is fucking piss me off. Again, the Lord Runner has talked about this so many times. It's the concept of extremes, right? You are basically just trading one extreme, which is the mass amount of grind and mass amount of XP you'll need to max out your character, for the opposite extreme, which is you absolutely can't. You can't max your character at all, and that is fucking stupid in my opinion, right? And that's a similar problem to what Kingdom Hearts 1 did. That's a similar problem to what Kingdom Hearts 1 had, right? It had this problem of it didn't understand it didn't understand the concept of don't waste my goddamn time. And god damn it, this webcam is still bugging me. Bugging me. Sorry. Alright. That's better. Right? Because that's what I felt like Sky 1 was starting to do. Because the trash mobs were freaking despicable. Like, you remember me bitching about the trash mobs in Zeiss, right? In both, in both Sky 1 and 2? That was why. Because you were facing these enemies that if you tried to auto A through them, they would wreck your shit, and there's no way to just deal with the nonsense to get to the point where you could auto A them. Because the only way to effectively auto A through those fights would be to go through New Game Plus, which is despicable in my opinion. It just doesn't work. It's not fun, right? And admittedly, I do feel like the Legend of Heroes games do suffer from one simple problem. They suffer from New Game Plus being way more fun than your first playthrough. Now, if I can try to explain myself a little bit with that, what I mean by that is, your first playthrough, you are going to slog through this. I distinctly remember my first playthrough of Cold Steel 1 specifically. There were so many retries. And admittedly, that was true of both Sky 1 and Sky 2. There weren't as many with Sky 3 because they were actually starting to smarten up with the scaling exp at that point. But at the same time, Sky 3 was also a substantially I don't want to say smaller game, but it was a substantially more dense game, which meant you were making more progress more quickly. And it also helped that it pulled the same stunt that Cold Steel 2 pulls, which is starts you off at a high level. So in other words, you've gone, the characters have gone through, their previous adventures, and now here's where they are power wise, right? It's actually the same thing that they will do with Cold Steel 4 specifically, when the previous when the Sky and Crossbell protagonists come into the fray. So that's cool. Here's the problem. But here's the thing. The reason why I never felt like I wanted to put Cold Steel 1 down even on my first playthrough, even though I was slogging through it, was for one very simple reason. I was constantly leveling up. Yes, the difficulty balancing is kind of crap. It's actually one of the biggest flaws of the Legend of Heroes franchise, in my opinion. The entire Trail series suffers from this, in my opinion. But at the same time, it feels like they were trying to mitigate this. Like they looked at what they did with the Sky trilogy and were like, how can we make this better? I know, let's actually have X multipliers. So if they do some, if they do specific things in battle, then that will substantially raise the exp to get up to like I think the highest I got was like a 2.8 multiplier, right? And I think it's in some of the later games you can get up to like a 3 point something multiplier, right? And that's what I like about that, because bonus X is always a good thing, right? Always has been, and in my opinion, always will be. Now, let's talk about why. So, how did I get into this game? Well, a friend recommended it to me. I'm not going to go through all of the details. I went through enough of the details on stream, but let's just say a coworker of mine recommended me the game. I got around to it finally, and I just ended up loving the hell out of it. I didn't love Cold Steel 2 as much. I'll be talking about that from my perspective in about 3 hours. Hours, funny enough, assuming I can get through this video in less than 3 hours. But he recommended it to me. I played it, and I fell in love. And that's actually what allowed me to go back and, and finally go ahead and replay Sky 1, actually beat Sky 1, and then go ahead and play through Sky 2 finally, and then Sky 3, and then just progress from there. But let's talk about why, why the very concept of this game appealing to me is weird. Now, I know what that now I know what that sounds like, and I can't sit like that. My legs are just being dumb today. Hey, which means, sorry, gotta adjust the camera one more time. But let's talk about why this game which is not one that would normally appeal to me, or at the very least, you would think it wouldn't appeal to me, because this you want to know what the subject at the core of this story is? Politics. Erebonian politics are at the core of this. Now, on the one hand, those that know me will probably be tilting their head going, what? I've described this difference to my roommate, so I will describe this difference to you. There is a difference between what I call politics, and political stories. Real life politics, what I usually refer to as politics, is usually boils down to, and this is also why politics was the word you used for hot button issues. in my experience, every single election that I have looked into, that I have seen anything on, that I have experienced in my life, and I've been around for, at this point, 32 and a half years. Here's to give you a better perspective. For 32 and a half years, I have encountered many different elections and whatnot, both in Canada and in my southern and down and for my southern neighbors down in the States. And every time, every time, it boils down to, especially in the US, it boils down to two usually really old guys, usually guys in their like 50s and 60s, basically sitting behind a podium each, looking at facing each other, and basically doing this. You're a shithead. No, you're a shithead. You're a shithead. No, you're a shithead. You're a shithead. Hey, you're a shithead. No, you're a shithead. You're a shithead. You're a shithead. And just keeps going back and forth and back and forth for that for however goddamn long. You know? My American neighbors only have to rewind the clock about 6 years to understand. Well, no, at this point, 7 years, excuse me. Only have to really rewind the clock about 7 years to really understand that point. And hell, let's face it, they only have to really rewind the clock about 2 years to really understand that concept. Because that's what most political ad campaigns, especially the ad campaigns, but that's usually what most political campaigns are wasting so much goddamn money on, is basically to be, let's just call it what it is, giant fucking man children that just need to grow the fuck up already. Now, obviously, there are leaders who can actually lead, but the problem is to be honest with you, I've never trusted. I cannot name a single politician who has ever actually, no, really earned my trust. I can name several that have earned my ire. I mean, there's a reason why the only I tend to not get pissed off whenever my best friends tend to riff and fucking mock the current leader of my country, right? Right? Because you try to give that man the benefit of the doubt, and he finds some way, somehow, to just disappoint you, right? I'm not even going to get into, anything that he may or may not have done, because that's not even the point of this. But that's the point, right? It's a playground argument that is literally just the same 3-word sentence being shot back and forth between two morons. And I'm just going to call it that. Because, again, I have not really met a politician that has really given me any respect. There's like one, but he was also kind of a jackass. He was just smart about how he was a jackass. But the point is I frankly do not care about real life politics, because that's what it fucking is. It's a fucking it's a dick measuring contest, but in the worst fucking form, right? Like like literally two men literally dropping trow and physically measuring their penises would be less fucking embarrassing to watch than most political elections. That's how fucking bad real life politics are to me, right? And that's why I don't pay attention most of the time, right? There's a reason why, there's a reason why people look at you and say, would you really trust the government? And there's also reasons why stuff like, oh, I don't know, Mystery Science Theater 3000 literally has a scene that has been turned into a clip that has been used by internet reviewers, such as Linkara, for example, a billion goddamn times. You know, the one with the dude singing, I'm the government, I'm the government, I'm the reason nothing works, right? That one. There's a reason why that one is fucking hilarious, even though it's over. It gets played a lot, especially on Linkara's videos, because it's so fucking true, and it has been true for, well, I imagine most of human existence. But that's neither here nor there. But then you have fictional politics, which is why I went on that giant tirade about real life politics and why I hate discussing it. Because fictional politics, I've likened it unto chess matches before. But that's not necessarily true, because a chess match usually relies on both players knowing everything about that board, about the chessboard, right? Because the chess pieces and how many of each piece there are do not change. Each side has one king, and each side has one queen, two rooks, two knights, and two bishops, unless they get one of their 8 pawns to the other side of the board, in which they can promote into another piece. Right? Now, on the one hand, that does make a degree of sense. Excuse me. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But actually, it's only really a chess game, if you think about it, from the writer's perspective, because the writer has all of the pieces in place, right? Even if it is backloaded storytelling, they still have all of the pieces for that particular point in the story that they're writing. So, for example, Cold Steel 1, it being written in a vacuum of everything else, well, now they have all of the chess pieces in place, and so they know which moves each side is going to use, right? But what's funny is that most of the time in character in universe, it's more like a political Tetris match. Hear me out. See, Tetris, depending on the version you play, you are only able to know one move ahead. You're only able to really think one move ahead, right? Or in some cases, up to, I think the most I've ever seen in a Tetris game is 5 pieces ahead, right? Plus the piece that's currently falling. So, for example, to use an example, let's say that you've got your political field. So now you have, and you're able to see these 5 moves. But the problem is that this is Tetris 99, and they can send garbage your way. So you also have to be constantly being aware of what they're doing to try and counter their moves, try to preempt their moves, and try to get rid of that. And if any garbage piles up onto your field, you have to get rid of it as fast as you can or risk losing, right? That's actually one of the reasons why a Tetris 99 works, in my opinion, is because of the frantic nature and the fact that you're up against 98 other people to be, to get that coveted title of Tetris Maximus for that match. Everybody's fighting hard to get rid of you, and you're fighting hard to not only stay alive, but get rid of them in the process. And you can kind of see the dynamic there. I mean, I have had matches where I have basically been in the bottom 10, and I have had Tetris 99 battles where I have been in the top 10 because of the very nature of, how aggressively that garbage gets sent to you. Because it can depend on how many attackers you have, how much trash each one is sending your way, and how how much of your ability to deal with that is there, right? And considering that in this scenario, the two people in this, the two people in this, in this political ring, well, I guess in this political Tetris match are Osborne, Prince Olivert, Olivert, and the Noble faction, and the Imperial Liberation Front, if you want to count them as separate, and spoilers, Ouroboros, if you want to count them as separate. And so unexpected twists have to come from each one, which is actually why when Osborne gets shot, go finish your speech in hell. Why it's so, why it comes as a bit of a whoa. Somebody actually got the drop on Osborne, especially considering how well he got the drop on Olivert in Sky 3. That's not insignificant if you actually stop and think about it. But as ever, I am getting ahead of myself. What makes the entirety of this thing a political match? Well, it's not just about the reformist faction versus the noble faction. And it's not actually, but it's also the very nature of the main characters of Class 7 themselves. Because they are a political statement by Olivier. Because he effectively wants a third solution. He effectively wants to get rid of this two-party nonsense, which I swear I'm not trying to be topical with that, especially with all of my talk of politics, including U.S. politics. But regardless, he is effectively trying to. He is effectively trying to work through the system. Olivier is trying to work through the system to create a new faction that can turn the tide and kind of keep both in check. A deterrent, if you will. Except way better than any nuclear deterrent could ever hope to be, because, Class 7 can actually accomplish shit. And actually do. In fact, it's kind of one of the reasons why the stuff that happens in Cold Steel 3 and 4 is the stuff that happens in Cold Steel 3 and 4, because once Class 7 entered the picture, well, Osborne had to change his strategy up, didn't he? And what's funny is he also thought Prince Oliver was just, that Class 7 wasn't going to mean anything. Oh, how frickin' wrong you were, Hergilius. Especially considering who Reen turns out to be, but that is for Cold Steel 2. That is for Cold Steel 2. And that's kind of why I got into this, because it was more about the intrigue rather than the immature pissing contest, right? Again, like I said, real life politics tend to be dick measuring contests that would literally be less embarrassing if two men literally dropped trow and physically measured their penises. Sorry to be obscene, but I, I'm being obscene on purpose to get across the fucking point that I hate real life politics, because every single fucking time it boils down to the same goddamn thing. It just changes its form every single time. I mean, there's a reason, for example, why there's an entire council in Star Trek, like the Federation Council, to keep it so that way you don't have the president of the Federation being frickin' and having way too much frickin' power, right? But I digress. But I'm, of course, getting way too far ahead of myself. Let's talk about the gameplay tweaks. Because this is the other reason. Now, I mentioned the multiplying exp already. The multipliers for the scaling exp, which is a great system, and I freaking love it to death. Let's also talk about the fact that now, okay, grain of salt, because I don't know how many of these changes were in the Crossbell games. Okay, in the because in here, when an enemy goes to fight you, goes to attack you, you the enemy swings at you, and then they miss, right? Well, instead of sitting there like dumbasses, like they do in the um in the Sky trilogy. Sorry, I've been up most of the night, and I've been up all night. Sorry. Anyways, instead of the nonsense that is, instead of the nonsense of just sitting there and having it be a missed attack, they'll see an opening and they'll attack, which is funny because those counters can also inflict the unbalancing mechanic, which I'll mention in a moment. So that's neat. Then there's excuse me. But unlike how they did Power Up and Awakening, this is actually balanced because the enemies can do it to you. Man, people are gonna totally disagree with my Fates video if I ever do one on Fire Emblem Fates, because oh boy, do I hate Pair Up with a burning passion in that game. But I'm not here to talk about Fates. Let's go ahead and talk about Cold Steel, right? So there's the counterattacks, which is awesome, and you don't need to have a separate quartz for that, which is nice. You still have the mechanic of your EP going up as you unlock slots, and at least I think it is. You have your EP going up. You have your unlocking of slots, and you have your limited selection. But there's also the master quartz, which I just realized I basically skipped over a note, but then again, I skipped over a few notes because I talked about the X multipliers already. But anyways, there's the Master Quartz. This is effectively a substitute for classes, right? You basically each player comes with their standard class, right? I forget all of the names, but I think Laura's is like Brave. Excuse me. I think Elisa's is Angel. I think Fee's is Raven, etc., etc. I'm sure you get the point. But they are effectively the classes, and you can actually swap out on the fly. In fact, there will even be the equivalent of dual classing when we get to Cold Steel 3, which is hilarious to me. But that's neither here nor there. Here. And also those level up, which gives boosts to your stats, which is also awesome. Then there's also the fact that while it is still enemies on screen and they will beeline for you, they actually fixed a really nasty issue I had with the enemies on field with between the Sky games and Cold Steel 1. Because I don't feel like saying I don't know if it's in the Crossbell games every time. So between Sky 3 and Cold Steel 1, they fixed the issue of back attacks. Because here's the thing, it is substantially harder in this game to have the enemy catch you off guard. It's only if you're not paying attention. Come on, buddy. Fuck off with that. You have to literally not be paying attention to be caught off guard by the enemy. Most of the time, it'll just be a normal encounter. But the enemies also don't immediately see you and start beelining for you like they tend to in almost everything else, right? In the Sky trilogy, for example. Because in Cold Steel, you can actually get behind the enemy, and you can actually hit them from behind, or run into them from behind. Now, there is a difference between single and double advantages, which I dumbly listed as double and triple advantage, but it is single and triple advantage. Single advantage basically just kind of gives you uh, initiative and I believe ups your CP. Triple advantage gives you the advantage, ups your CP. I think it also heals you a little bit and does a little bit of damage to the enemy. Now, in order to do that, you have to get behind them and hit the enemy from behind, which will then effectively KO them, which means then you can run into them for a triple advantage and you will be able to substantially do more. And this can help with a lot of the trash mobs, because enemies have distinct patterns. So unless you have turbo mode on the entire time, which I do not recommend, by the way, then you will not, you won't have any real issues with it. And that's actually very cool. Then there's the combat links. So, and the off balance mechanic. So, when you're fighting an enemy, you effectively form combat links. Now, this is a connection between two characters. They also kind of play with this in the story a little bit too, with some of the severed links, which I'll talk about when we get to the story section. But effectively, when two people hit, if you hit an enemy and knock them off balance, which each enemy with each weapon type, there are basically 4 weapon types, well, attack types really, and if you hit them with an attack, if the attack type causes them to go off balance, then you can actually do a follow-up attack. Now, I was doing New Game Plus, so I had all of them already unlocked, but at first you can only do just the assist, which is just your partner does a follow-up attack, which can actually also lead to a finishing blow if you've leveled up their link level with them, between those two characters enough. Then, and then later on you can actually do a rush, which you gain bravery points every time you do an assistant attack, right? The assist attack. So if you spend 3 bravery points, you're able to unleash a rush move, which effectively is the two characters attack together and they do some extra damage. Then there's burst, which everybody basically goes around and attacks all of the enemies to try and deal as much damage as they can, which you get later in the game, and it costs you 5 bravery points. Now, the bravery points are not that are basically just used for the all-out attacks, basically, without being as awesome as all-out attacks. I will admit it. I mean, I may not like Persona 5, but I will admit those all-out attacks were beautiful. Beautiful, right? It's just a game I don't like. Like, it's not a bad game. It's a very good game. It's just, I don't like it. There's a difference. But anyways, my point is, my point is you do these attacks and they can deal some sweet damage, right? They're usually a good way to clear out trash mobs or to get a little bit of extra damage in on bosses. By the way, the bosses do suffer from too much health, in my opinion, and not enough damage taking. I mean, for God's sake, some of these enemies have ridiculous amounts of health. I mean, the final boss has 144 or 1,000 max HP, and I think the maxi to that battle, well, I don't count the Divine Knight battles, by the way. So the Draken, I count the Draken as the true final boss, as essentially the final on foot boss. And meanwhile, I'm just doing a max of like 1,500, which is terrible, by the way. Although, if you want to count those as extra bosses, then Loa Erebonius is the final boss, and he has like 200 and something thousand HP, and he was only taking, God, what? From normal attacks, I think he was taking like a 12 or 1,300. which is pathetic, by the way. Yeah, the damage output is kind of weird. The damage output has always been weird in this series, and it's not enough to make me feel weak, but it's not enough to make me feel strong either, if you catch my drift. So, yeah, I'm all for it. And it's with the Arcus units, which are effectively the upgraded version of the Orbments, which is always awesome. Uh, Side quests are largely the same as they ever are. Then there's the exploring of the old schoolhouse, which which you do every single chapter, which is kind of cool. There's the bonding events, which you can raise link experience with Rean and different characters. These are basically social links. Thanks for those familiar with the Persona series. Then there's the practical exams, which are basically if you want some extra AP, go ahead and do it. By the way, I did not get all of the AP in the game, and I still managed to get the highest rank. So don't be too butthurt if you miss some bonus AP, and you start getting A ranks, because you can still get you can still do A ranks and still make it work. Then there's mini games like Blade, for example, which is actually honestly a very fun mini game. It is effectively the game I would compare it to the most is actually kind of like War, right? Where you're trying to gain have more points than your opponent. Effectively, you play through your entire hand, and and until you screw up and play the wrong card, or if you end your turn with lower points than your opponent, then you automatically lose, which is usually why you want to have your hand, the opponent's hand, be empty in order to, in order to go ahead and to gain the higher points in order to win the match. Just checking my notes for any gameplay stuff. Oh yeah, there's also destroyable obstacles. There's obstacles that you can destroy. Usually it's in the form of boxes and whatnot, which is okay. That's kind of cool. Checking my notes, checking my notes, checking my notes. Oh wait, there should be one on page 1 that I'm overlooking. Where is it? There it is, right there. So let's talk about why I did not like Eustace or Machias on my first playthrough, and why it took me a while to warm up to them. Even though if you actually explore their characters, they are actually really cool characters. Eustace and Machias have a really bad ego problem on both sides of the equation. Machias is like hardcore anti-noble, almost to the let's be blunt, almost to the point of, well, I guess that's classist at that point, isn't it? Right? Like he is guilty of hardcore classism to the fullest, because of how much he just has a deep-seated, burning hatred of the nobility, to the point where he can't stand nobles. And of course, because Eustace views that Machias as effectively a egotistical idiot who's constantly pouring shoving into Eustace's face what he already knows, that the nobility is a flawed as fuck system. Well, he basically just snarks about it, and basically just kind of is like Yeah, okay. Hey, I'm gonna snark back at you because as you're basically being a prejudiced you're basically being a prejudiced idiot. So, all right, you are clearly not worth my goddamn time. It's funny because Eustace and Machias actually develop kind of a weird an Odo and Quark dynamic for those that know Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In other words, they do deeply care about each other, but neither one is willing to admit it, especially to the other, which even goes as far as Cold Steel 3, where if you actually have Machias heal Eustace, Eustace will literally be like, I didn't ask you to do that. It, that. Now, what made me absolutely want to smack these two? And what made it take so long for me to warm up to them? Because, well, I was gonna say they were thinking with their penises, but that's not actually true. That's not actually true. No, when it comes to Elise, I would actually accuse Patrick of fucking thinking with his penis, but that's for later. No, the problem was that they basically thought with their egos. Yusa Uzumaki basically thought that with their egos. Now I'll get into this more when we start talking story, but even from a gameplay perspective, there's some gameplay story integration because the storyline basically goes that Sarah basically goads them because they're like, hey, hey, because they basically look at the fact that they're both being sent to Bereahard, Eustace's hometown, and they both protest because they think it's a freaking joke. Like, what are you trying to prove, right? Because they don't realize the value of it because they were too busy bickering during the first field study, but let's not get into that yet. And then Sarah basically says, you know what? Okay. Okay. You guys want it changed so badly? I'll spar with you. If you manage to defeat me, I'll change the groupings. I'll put Machias in Group B or whatever, right? Machias won't have to go to Breahard, which arguably would probably have caused more complications for Duke Alberea, but let's not get into that. So they decide, all right, we're going to go ahead and do this. Now, the level that you usually are at, and I actually proved this on stream, that I actually went back through and actually went ahead and did a non-New Game Plus run where I actually got up to that point and was like, okay, hey, so let me show you these guys are idiots. And I think I got Reen up to like 17 or 18 at that point. I did a lot of off screen for this stream, by the way. Hey, just as a heads up, because I covered basically everything, with very few exceptions. But Eustace and Machias basically are like, yeah, all right, we'll take you up on that, instructor. Yeah, we're gonna kick your ass. Now you're probably thinking, oh, let me guess, it's because she's a woman, isn't it? No, no. I mean, okay, Sarah does hint at that by basically saying male pride is so predictable. But the thing is, and well, that is kind of true because guys tend to get a little more pissed off when our pride is pricked than women do. It's kind of a fact. Right? We do have less emotional control usually, but but it in this case it was really just them not thinking, right? Because they're basically looking at it as if Thor's is basically pulling stupid by having Sarah be an instructor. But they never ask the obvious question. Why did they hire Sarah? Like, why is Sarah allowed to be an instructor at Thor's military academy? And the answer is very simple. Not to, because spoiler alert, she's a bracer. Further spoiler alert, she's an A rank bracer. And spoilers for my goddamn point, well, you're barely at level 20. At this point, you are at best barely at level 20. She's at level 50. Actually, I think it's level 49, but my point still stands. Hence, like, I, see, now, okay, I know the idea of trusting authority, as I demonstrated earlier in this very I know that trusting authority without question is dumb, but that's the problem. Problem. Refusing to trust authority without question is equally as dumb, because that's what these two yahoos fucking do. And then Reen gets dragged into it and he gets his ass kicked. It's so stupid. It is so goddamn stupid. It's actually one of the reasons why it's so cathartic, especially if during the rematch you actually have Reen pair up with Eustace and Machias to take Sarah down, to see how far they've come, right? They are more comfortable with each other. Again, it's the Odo and Quark thing from Deep Space Nine. I mean, they do care about each other. They just don't. They just refuse to admit it, right? My favorite example of this: Broken Link, season 4, episode 26. I want to say. I want to say it's season 4. Yeah, I'm right. I'm right. I'm right. Right. Season 4, episode 26. For those that don't quite remember that episode, that was the episode where Odo was suffering from a disease where the only way to cure him was to take him back to the Great Link so that he could be judged, and then they would cure him. When he's leaving, Quark comes up to him and basically says, "I'll be running this show by the time I get back." Heck, and Odo basically says, "Until I get back." It basically says something to the effect of "until I get back." It basically, for all intents and purposes, corrects him and basically says, "until I get back." And then Quark kind of responds in a very Quark way, "then you are coming back." And obviously the scene is played out much better because Rene Bergenois, I'm probably butchering that name and I apologize because I had a lot of respect for that actor. Odo's actor, may he rest in peace, is a damn talented actor, and so is Armin Shimmerman, right? So, oh, right, and that's kind of the dynamic I get from Eustace and Machias. It's played up for comedy way too much. Well, I shouldn't say way too much. It's played up for comedy more often than not. But they do trust each other. There's a reason why that combat link gets formed, after all. It just took Sarah kicking their fucking ass to realize that. There's also other mini games such as the swimming lessons, which are actually which is basically a timing mini game, which is actually kind of cool. Uh, the Nosferatu fight is brutal. There's several bosses that are just brutal because they have obnoxious mechanics. By the way, my most hated bosses in this game are actually Nosferatu and Loa Erebonius, and that's just because they can basically incapacitate one of your people out of frickin' nowhere, because why the hell not? forgive me, I'm just kind of going over my notes here. I don't think there's really anything else I really have to say gameplay-wise. Guys, I think I'm going to leave the stuff with the Divine Knights for later. But I will say that, from the gameplay perspective, the Divine Knight battles are basically just cathartic at that point. So I think I'm done with gameplay. Let's move on to the story now. I've been at this for, oh god, I've been talking for an hour already. God damn. So let's talk about the story finally. So I've already talked about the political move that is the creation of Class 7. I'll touch on that a bit more as we go through, but we actually start with a flash forward. Now, this is not the only RPG to have done this, and it is not the last one to do this, because Cold Steel 3 also does this too. But if you're going to do a flash forward, you have to be very, very careful with how you apply it. Admittedly, this flash forward cheats in one simple way: the exclusion of Millium. Which I don't know why, because they already spoiled that Millium was a thing in this game in the opening, but whatever. But the point is, a flash forward can work well, but sometimes it can work, sometimes it doesn't. There is a benefit to a medias res, and I do think this works better than most, but I will say this much. I don't... I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Flash forwards can be done well or poorly. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's either. I think, if we're going to use the lore runners terms some more, I think this is what we would call a wash, right? I don't think the flash forwards in either, from memory, in this or in Cold Steel 3, add anything or subtract anything. I think they're basically just a wash, basically, right? In fact, I think it almost would have been better if we had started with a scene that effectively was, Oliver coming up with the idea of Class 7 and then going from there. But I digress. But yeah, no, they cheat with like 2 characters not being there, specifically Millium and Crow. It almost feels like that's meant to be more of a demo, right? My opinion. So then Reen arrives in Trista, and I gotta say, I like Trista. I tend to appreciate quiet little towns as hubs, because usually it tends to be very simple and not be like overly elaborate, right? It's kind of a similar vibe I got from Roland as the opening area for the Sky games for Sky 1 specifically. Loloc being the opening locale for Sky 2, basically, unless you count the prologue, and then excuse me, and then of course the airship, the airship heist in Sky 3, right? It's a nice, quaint little town. And then Reen bumps into Elisa. So then they go into the opening ceremony, Principal Van Dyke has that epic speech, with a quote from Emperor Dracos. Arise, O youth, and become the foundation of the world. And yes, I didn't, and no, I did not write it down because I can quote that from memory. I've heard it so many times. It's a good catchphrase. I like it. So then they go to the old schoolhouse. They get dumped on by Sarah. Fee tries to escape falling, but Sarah won't let it. Lame. And then Reen has his awkward moment with Elisa. Yeah. He basically, on instinct, goes to protect Elisa, who he just met, and basically ends up with him on the floor, or Elisa on top of him, and her chest in his face. Now, I want you to understand, pay attention to the fact that his own hands were out at the side, and he was literally being like, hands to the side, right, hands where she can see them, no sudden moves. It was because he's basically trying not to aggravate the situation any further. Now, he still gets slapped, and Elisa basically has her pride effectively. Elisa basically is flawed, basically, is how it is the way that goes, right? She knows she shouldn't be mad at Reen. I mean, she knows bloody well it was an accident. He was not out to get a face full of boob. He was not out there to get a face full of opie. He was frickin', he was just trying to protect Elisa, right? So, it takes her time to really figure out that was an accident. But I suppose it does make a degree of sense when you stop and you think about it. So, shrug, I guess. Now, admittedly, they do go ahead and they do apologize for it on the day of their first field study, which I actually like, because they both apologize at the same time. Because, okay, there is a trope in anime that I fucking despise. I tend to call it Love-Hina syndrome. So, new wolfism today. Love-Hina syndrome. Now, why do I call it Love-Hina syndrome? See, Love-Hina has this nasty habit of, I believe his name is Kotaru, and I believe the main love interest is Haru. Love-Hina has this nasty habit of having having comedy scenes where the scene goes like this. Kotaru finds himself in a precarious, almost somewhat silly and perverted situation. Oftentimes not of his own free will, and in fact, in one specific case, he's literally forced into it by being tied up. And yet, every single time that he is caught by Haru, which includes the time he was tied up, by the way, it's always Kotaro's fault, and he's the one that gets the shit beat out of him. Instead of, oh, I don't know, oh, the woman that was like one step away from raping him. And yes, I'm dropping that fucking bombshell to get across the point that it's not fucking funny. I have never found that funny, because it's not funny, honey. There's no reason why the guy should always be frickin' slapped. Just because of his precarious situation. Now, if he's enjoying the shit out of the perverted situation, instead of backing off and being like, whoa, sorry, then yeah, okay, slap the shit out of him. great example of that. At 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 Kelvin Kirk over in the Abrams Star Trek movies, the Chris Pine Kirk. In the first movie, he gets punched. He ends up trying to brace himself. He ends up grabbing onto Uhura's chest, and he smiles about that. Yeah, no, he deserved that slap for that. Like, dude, seriously? Seriously? By contrast, by contrast, in the example that I give, most of the time the guy doesn't really deserve the smack. Sometimes it's tolerable because the guy does deserve the smack. Heck, but still, again, I can only name one instance where it's actually earned, and it's so stupid. I hate it so goddamn much. Granted, I mean, the reverse is also true to try and play fair because gender doesn't matter. To go back to the Kotaro and Haru situation, if the genders were flipped, and Kotaro was the one smacking. If the roles were reversed and Kotaro was the one smacking Haru for perverted situations, yeah, I know how uncomfortable that sounds, but again, it would still be just as fucking stupid. Arguably more so because of the connotations. Nations, right? Especially if especially because in that case, if those roles were reversed, then 99.9 repeating percent of the time, if it was reversed and Kotaro was the one hitting Haru, Haru wouldn't have deserved it. Haru wouldn't have deserved it at all. Ever. And that's my fucking problem with that trope in a nutshell. And why I call it Love Hina syndrome. Because that's what passes for comedy in Love Hina. Beating the shit out of somebody for circumstances that were outside of their control. I'm all for punishing somebody when they've actually done something. I'm far less okay with somebody getting punished for something they didn't do. Which I realized can have a lot of nasty connotations, so let's just move on. I don't want to get into real life stuff here, okay? I don't. Anyways, now the reason why I'm okay with it here, and spoilers for Cold Steel 3, in Cold Steel 3, when history repeats itself, Elf to quote Reen, it's mostly because it's heat of the moment, right? And even then, the scene does play fair, right? Because the characters involved in Cold Steel 3, like the girl in question from Cold Steel 3, slaps, slaps, uh, slaps the dude, because again, history literally repeated itself with a male student having a female classmate land on top of them into them, breast in face, which is funny because that one actually literally says it's not that you're heavy. I just seem to be having trouble breathing. you know, and it's mostly the calm, the fact that he's so goddamn calm about it. Because the thing is that they also, and those two actually do apologize as well to each other, because again, she was in the heat of the moment, and he kind of was like, he admits his own weakness, right? Because in Cold Steel 3's case, the guy basically looks at that and says, "Yeah, that's my own weakness because was not able to do that." And in the heat of, even though he in the heat of the moment, the girl says, "Oh, everybody in men are the worst." Another classmate literally chimes in saying, "I do not believe his nationality was a factor." Right? See, that's more okay because it's all about okay, this was an unfortunate accident. Can we just apologize to each other and move on? Instead of this fucking dragging it out for 20 billion years bullshit, or having it happen way too fucking often. Which was also the ultimate problem with Love Hina, because it was basically, you were guaranteed to get one of those stupid ass situations where Kotaro would get beaten up for being a perv per episode, which made it a tired and bullshit trope. That's another way I can actually tolerate it, and why I don't usually, well, I hate it with a burning passion. I tend to just kind of gloss over it in a lot of shows if the rest of the show is good, because it usually only happens in one episode and then they move on. Same with this. It happens in one chapter, they move in one scene, then they move on. I mean, effectively for one chapter, and then they move on, because it is effectively like only like something like a third of the way through the first chapter one when Rin and Elisa apologize to each other. So I'm okay with it in this case because, again, both of them admit that there was fault. They had some fault. Both of them acknowledge that it was an embarrassing circumstance, and both of them agree that we probably just should sweep this under the rug and pretend it never happened, right? The problem is, so many goddamn times it's brought up again and again, which is just for both of them. I mean, for God's sakes, Crow brings it up, and it's like, dude, I am going to get. I can just imagine Rain just being like, "How do you? Okay, one, how do you know that? And two, I am going to kick you in the fucking balls, Crow." At least I'd be like that. I'd be like, "Okay, I don't know. Frankly, I don't know, and I don't care how the fuck you knew. I am going to fucking kick you in the balls for this." Right? Because it's an embarrassing circumstance. It's right. Do you want the embarrassing moments to be dragged up all the time? I didn't think so. But anyways, so then, but before the apology, we're introduced to the character of Toa, the student council president, which is also how we basically get our side quests on the free days. And then there's, of course, side quests that were tasks were handed for, required in side quests in the field studies. Toa is a very interesting character because Reen's reaction to her is very similar, weirdly enough, and I know I keep referencing him, but Reen's reaction to Toa is very much the same reaction I have to the Lore Runner. For the love of God, slow down if you need to, and don't burn yourself out. Now, the Lore Runner keeps claiming that he is not reaching burnout, but I mean, for God's sakes, seriously, do me a favor. Go to his website. Yes, Lore has a website. God, that meme. I want you to do me a favor. In another tab, bring up Lore's website, right? LoreRunner.com. Scroll down until you see the list. And just scroll through those games. Yeah, it's a large goddamn list. There's a reason why I worry about burnout. Now, I know he's got this whole, funding priority system that really is good, is a good system. I don't want to dog it. But my point is that he allows so much more to be brought onto his plate, you know? Hell, actually, all you really need to do is, and I'm sure this will still be true, even when I finally upload this damn thing, the queue is also going to be is also ridiculously big, even right now, which is funny. Which I would laugh my ass off if, when I actually do get this uploaded, he's got both the list and the queue substantially shrunk. which will just defeat my point. But right now, I think he's got something like, God, what, 400 games? Also, he had to basically allow, like, oh, God, how many goddamn games? Games to be basically re-added to the list. I want to remind you that he's been streaming on a regular basis for years. And his review system has also been going on for years. If you give me a moment, I will give you some dates. Hey, it's to really hammer this point home. It's right. So I'm on Lore's site right now. Okay, so scroll down. I don't really want the queue. What do I want? I think it's old archives. Yes? Yes, here we go. So let's hit date of run. He has been reviewing, like he was doing this a couple of years before this, but in from October of 2017 all the way up to October of 2020. So for basically 3 years worth of runs, which is insane, by the way. I'm not going to sit here and count because that would just be, whoa, no, let's not. Holy hell, let's not. Not. Because my point is still made. 3 years worth of runs, and even accounting for the 4 months he took off for the World of Warcraft series, the most unfortunately timed series in the history of ever considering when he was in the middle of making that. That's when all of the shit with ActiBlizzard started coming to light. By the way, I am indeed anti the bullshit of ActiBlizzard. To be honest with you, I am less inclined to buy Activision and Blizzard products, but that is a case by case for me, because there's certain things that I'm not going to be able to resist. Admittedly, yes, I know I'm part of the problem, but hey, all I'm saying is I do not like that crap. But you know what? I can't win with any of it, right? And if I boycott everything, then I'm gonna have nothing left, right? I mean, geez, even Bandai Namco has had some shit, and don't even get me started on Nintendo, Capcom, and especially Sony. But whatever. Point is, point is, video game companies always have dirty laundry. Period. Some worse than others. Moving on. But no, in all seriousness, that is how Reen treats Toa. Reen looks at Toa's workload and is just like, what the actual fuck? Right? Now, admittedly, part of that is embarrassment for his instructor because Sarah kind of has a bit of a lazy streak, and let's face it, while she does, from a combat perspective, earn her position, from an actual teacher's perspective, she has weaknesses. And really, honestly, there's plenty of times where several people, Neidhart, Reen, the entirety of Class 7, all wish she would take her teacher gig a little more seriously. You know? But Toa powers through it. And so Reen effectively becomes the errand boy for the student council, and that leads to side quests, which always includes exploring the old schoolhouse, which basically becomes a per chapter thing. Because the old schoolhouse basically effectively morphs every month and changes shape, effectively acting as a giant test, right? A test mostly for Reen. it ends up more or less being a test for uh for the entirety of Class 7, but let's face it, the one who was really being tested, if you understand the distinction, was Reen. Like the one that was the one who was handed that test was Reen. It's just Reen did not go ahead and do that test alone, if you understand my drift, if you catch my drift. Which is a nice touch. So then there's the field study to Keldic to progress forward a little bit. We do some more stuff, and then we encounter the provincial army. Can I just say the provincial army really doesn't hide the fact that they're evil, like, at all. You take one look at their attitude and you're like, yeah, they're evil. They are effectively going to be the villains, which is hilarious to me because that actually gets proven with the robbery from Grand Market, right? Because they go ahead, and effectively go to arrest Class 7 for no fucking reason other than to cover their asses. It is really fucking stupid. Now, I have no doubts whatsoever that there are several people that would not stand for that fucking nonsense. And in fact, if anything, well, there's a reason why Claire was right there, right? She's an Iron Blood. You're not going to tell me that Osborn wouldn't see opportunity in knocking, namely the Provincial Army being, let's call it what it is, so fucking stupid that you swear they're guzzling gallons upon gallons of paint thinner every fucking day. Okay, pause, real talk for a second. I used to be very, very. I used to very just willy nilly use the word retarded to mean stupidity. I have since become more sensitive towards the idea that mental retardation is not something that should be joked about. I admit it now. My friends are always referring to that, but again, it gets kind of bothersome if you have to keep clarifying every time, or if you get judged because you meant one thing when somebody else thought you meant another. So I decided to just cut out the middleman and come up with a new phrase. So when I say that a character is, a person or a character is guzzling paint thinner, I'm effectively meaning that they are brain dead morons who are so freaking stupid that people with actual mental retardation are looking at them and going, "You're so fucking stupid." Yeah, you know, when you make somebody who has actual literal mental health issues like with maybe with say a learning disability or a motor function disability look like they are are a well versed or effectively modern day Albert Einstein, well, you seriously have a goddamn problem. And I'm not very smart, so if I'm the one saying you're guzzling paint thinner, then you're really fucking stupid. Really fucking stupid. Now, I also usually try to reserve that for really fucking stupid people. Like blatantly stupid people where it's just like, "Oh my god. Uh, how are you this dumb?" Right? And that's the Provincial Army. By the way, their speech each basically debunks the idea that any of them actually suffer from mental retardation. So, sorry, no, you don't get to get off the hook on that one. Anyways. So, yeah. But let's talk about the Grand Market. Now, I like the idea of a merchant town. There's just something that appeals to me about that, right? Like the idea that there's a shopping central. It's actually kind of a nice little thing. So then they basically think about class 7. So then class 7's purpose comes up as they're thinking about it. They effectively realize that class 7's purpose is effectively to, well, effectively to be a replacement for the Bracer Guild, if you think about it. No, seriously, think about it. Think about how the side quests are structured. Think about how all of the how the very nature of the gameplay is structured. The side quests, the points, being handed pieces of paper that have quests listed on it, being able to go around and find hidden quests. Think about that for a second. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to the quest design from the Sky trilogy, specifically Sky 1 and 2? That's a plot point to keep in the back of your mind. So then Laura confronts Reen about the way he enacts his way of the sword, and this is when we start to learn that he has doubts. So then the Grand Market is robbed to try to frame two people of a crime they literally did not commit, which leads them to investigate. Which leads them to the Naturia. Did I write it down? No, I didn't. Keldix Nature Park. Which of course leads to the thieves, which are posing as workers, which then leads to the Provincial Army going to arrest Class 7, and then they get saved by Claire Revolt of the Railway Military Police. We'll talk about her a little bit more because she's another character who I understand her, but I also want to smack her for basically missing the goddamn point. Mostly just because as there's kind of an issue with how loyal she is to Osborne. Which is a point to keep in the back of your mind for Cold Steel 3, because that's where, in my blunt opinion, her loyalty to Osborne becomes completely inexcusable. But I digress. So then we move on to Chapter 2, where there is a tutor side quest, which kind of has which kind of is a funny thing for when we get to Cold Steel 3. So I already mentioned fighting Sarah because Eustace and Machias are morons. So then we go to Berea Hard, and we meet Rufus Alberea, Eustace's brother, aka the only person who actually treats Eustace like a human being within his family. No, I'm dead serious. Now, okay, maybe the chef uncle you could argue, but really of his immediate family, that's the only one who treats him with any kind of level of respect. Mostly because Duke Alberea is a moron, hypocrite, and also, thanks to Cold Steel, will become a war criminal while we're on the subject. I just feel like dropping that spoilery bombshell right here for Cold Steel 2 because I really fucking hate Duke Alberea. I really do. So then they have the problem of the severed link, which leads to Reen being injured and needing to pull back. They report to Oryx Fort, which is being completely rearmed. Point for later. Point to keep in the back of your mind for later. So then we encounter Duke Alberea, who basically then demands that Eustace go back because it's to basically trap Machias for political gains. because his dad is the imperial governor, effectively the prime minister of the country. You effectively think of him as, I suppose you could say, like two or three steps down from the imperial family within the Erebonian government. So then Rufus basically puts an end to Duke Alberea's bullshit, and reveals that he's on Thor's board of directors. Which is kind of funny considering how many people actually have family on the board of directors. For the record, it is three distinct characters. You have Rufus, which is Eustace's brother. You have Machias's dad, Governor Regnitz. You have Elisa's mother. We'll talk about her in a second. And then, of course, you have Prince Olivert on there, too. So, yeah. Quite a packed group of board of the directors. So this is also where we start to hear whispers of Laura and Fee not really getting along, because this is where Fee's history as a Jaeger comes into play, which I didn't write down because I'm an idiot. And then we're introduced to Sharon Kruger, who reveals that Elisa's last name is Reinford, which is funny because I haven't actually mentioned the name Reinford yet. Sarah, of course, recognizes Sharon because, spoilers, the severing chains. And this is where Elisa is royally pissed off. She does like Sharon. Aaron, let's not beat around the bush. But she is trying to get away from her overbearing mother. Too bad for her that her mother's on the board of directors. Damn it. That's what Elisa thinks. So then the practical exam shows up. But instead of another battle against a combat shell, Patrick shows up to cause a fight. This is as good a time as any to mention that Patrick Hyarms is, in my opinion, either the absolute worst or the second worst character in the entirety of the Cold Steels, period. Possibly even of all of Trails, but one, I'd have to play the Crossbell games to really determine that, and two, I haven't played 4 yet. I still haven't played 4 yet, and 3, Patrick does get better in Cold Steel 3, which is funny because in my opinion Elise actually gets worse because of a point we'll mention later. In this game, Elise is fine, but in this one and in Cold Steel 2, Patrick is the fucking worst. And nowhere is his stupidity more evident other than his appearance in Cold Steel 2. But if we're not counting Cold Steel 2, or I should pull back the reins of, because that's after the whole Duke Alberea war criminal thing. If we pull back the reins of my anger a little bit and really dive into it, Patrick's biggest problem actually worst showing is actually here in Cold Steel 1. And because he's always had this chip on his shoulder against Green. But this is where Patrick goes full tilt. It basically becomes, in my opinion... Okay. You ever heard of the concept of the moral event horizon? On the off chance you're not familiar with it, the moral event horizon is effectively when a character goes too far. Now, this obviously varies from person to person. My moral event horizon is going to be different than your moral event horizon, and so on and so forth, right? But in my opinion, Patrick basically surpassed the Moral Event Horizon. Now, what's funny is you're probably thinking, oh, with how much you hated Agate in Sky 1, did he cross the Moral Event Horizon? He did. However, he then spent the next he did in Sky 1, but then he spent Sky 2, but then he spent Sky 2, Sky 3, and Cold Steel 3 all trying really hard to reverse, like to come back from the Moral Event Horizon, right? Trying to come back from going over it. Now, in my opinion, Agate did succeed. The jury's still out on Patrick because, see, Patrick basically passes the Moral Event Horizon by effectively being an egotistical, smarmy jerk. It was already teetering on the edge by being a smarmy, egotistical dipshit. But, by basically trying to tell Reen, ditch your commoner friends because they're not worth your time, kind of shit, right? But this, when Class 1 challenges Class 7, Patrick shows up with 3 other guys, and this is where I have to put my fucking foot down with Patrick. This is why I hate Patrick so fucking much in this one. Because, see, Patrick wants you to fight him with a very specific party. Okay? No girls. So, no Elise, no Elisa, no Fee, no Emma. Because men should not be beating on women. Women are delicate flowers and they must be protected. All I'm gonna say is that Laura is my best character in the Cold Steels, and that consistently is true throughout like the entire fucking series. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. So you're like, okay, so I'll just take Elisa, Emma, and Fee out of the party. Sorry, girls, I really would love for you guys to kick his ass, but whatever. I'll just bring Laura because Laura's a warrior, right? A swordswoman, not a dainty flower. Patrick is like, I said no women. You sexist piece of fucking shit. Okay, fine. Eustace, come on. And I'll bring you, Elliot, and Gaius for this one. What now, Patrick? Eustace Alborea should not have to prove the significance of the nobility. Translation. Eustace could kick his ass in 5 seconds, and he knows that. Alright, fine. Reen, Machias, Gaius, Elliot. So we kick their asses, and it's like, okay. And maybe he could have gotten away with saying, well, you certainly did well for commoners and a baron's son. Very good. Good show. He could have just been a good sport about it, sheathed his sword and said, good show. We'll be on our way. Hey. And note how Class 7 also basically says, oh man, that was a tough fight, right? Like, oh man, and they almost got us a couple of times. We managed to pull through, but but it was a tough fight, right? The others are basically willing to admit the other members of Class 1 are basically willing to admit defeat, except for one. Patrick. Patrick effectively spits on on the very idea of commoners, saying that commoners should know their place and blah 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 blah, and basically he basically talks derogatory to not only the female classmates. I don't even remember exactly what all he fucking said outside of calling Gaius a foreigner, but he's and calling Reen, the illegitimate, the adopted son of Baron without a drop of noble blood, and he effectively pulls out all of the insults possible. Like, it gets to the point where the girls are basically glaring at Patrick, and you're just looking at Patrick like, okay, Patrick, those girls are basically one. You are on the nerve, the last nerve of every girl in this fucking class. Yes, dude. In fact, if it wasn't for fucking Gaius, I am pretty fucking sure one of them, at least one of them, my money would have been on Elisa doing it, to be honest. You were one step away from at least one of them walking up to you and fucking slapping the shit out of you. And then castrating you so your fucking sexist bullshit cannot be passed on to the next generation. Look, a guy can dream, can he? But yeah, this is where he crossed the line for me. You want to have a bone to pick with Reen, fine. Hey, that's fine, right? You don't want to trust foreigners? Fine. Right. You want to think that nobility is higher than the commoner? If you want to say that nobility is higher than commoners, fine. Fine. But for the love of fucking God, Patrick, knowing enough is enough. Like, any one of these statements by itself would have been like, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? Who? But all of these statements combined are just. Even on stream, I could feel myself getting really fucking angry at this scene. Because it was so stupid. It was so fucking stupid. Like, Eustace and Machias, that is actually kind of an entertaining level of, okay, that's cute and all, right? This is straight up fucking misogyny and classism taken to extremes. Like, even the other boys in class 1 kind of look at Patrick and like, whoa, Patrick, you've gone too far, man, and step back and apologize. And again, like I said, class 1, well, they were annoyed at the whole, no women and, no uses attitude of his. We're just like, okay, we're willing to let bygones be bygones. Like, even the girls, I'm sure, would have let Patrick's misogyny go if frickin' if he had left it at that, right? If it was just that he was defeated, the end, right? This isn't over, Schwarzer. You are my eternal rival. Something like that. I don't think anybody would have cared. But then he doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on not only his classism, but his sexism as well. And I'm going to call it what it fucking is. It's sexism. Because what he is basically saying by, hey, we are not fighting girls, is he is basically saying that women only belong in the kitchen. And they don't mean it in the stupid way my roommate has said that statement. Because he pulls that and then when he clarifies, it's like, oh, because what his version is, everybody belongs in the kitchen because that's where food is. In other words, the idea is people belong in the kitchen. Now you're probably wondering, why do I bring all this up? Well, not only to shit on Patrick, because fuck him, he would absolutely, in my opinion, he is absolutely at least two negatives to story. Or when we get there, here on Lore Streams, I'm gonna be fine for two story negatives for Patrick. Jesus Christ, I hate him so goddamn much. Three would be pushing it. Pushing it. I don't think he quite reaches his legendary Angler Estelle levels of terrible from a narrative perspective, but boy does he fucking creep up on it. God damn it. But jeez. I mean, I'd probably give him three negatives, but that's only because he has the fucking audacity to hit on Reen's sister. For the record, I'm also somebody who, in Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, never pairs Erica and Ainz together. My canon pairings for Sacred Stones are always Erica and Seth, Ephraim and Tana. That is how Erica and Tana become actual no really sisters. I know a lot of people like to pair Ephraim with Larashal, but let's face it, there's not exactly too many wrong stances with Ephraim. A lot of his relationships are well written, in my opinion. So what was the other reason I brought this up? Because one was to shit on Patrick. The other one was, well, the other one was to segue into Gaius' speech. Because, you know what's funny? Gaius actually diffuses the situation. He doesn't do so by yelling. He doesn't do so by beating the shit out of Patrick. No, no. You know how he does it? By asking a very logical question. What makes the nobility so special? I'm grinning like a fucking idiot right now because, yeah, that question stumps the shit out of Patrick. And what's funny is I honestly do have an honest question for you. Do you think that was genuine curiosity on Gaius's part, or do you think he was just asking that to seriously ask the question? Now, keep in mind this is not mutually exclusive. It could very well be both, right? Because let's face it, both ideas actually have merit, which is why it's interesting to kind of hear the idea, Veen's idea of nobility in the Nord side quests. Speaking of which, we actually go to Nord next, which is why Gaius got that scene, and we're introduced to Gaius's family. This is where we got to talk a bit about Nord culture. Now, it is in my opinion that if you're going to do an allegory for, uh, you know, people who are native to a country, Native Americans, uh, you know, Aboriginals here in Canada, and so on and so forth, you genuinely have to, first of all, do your research, especially if you're just going to straight adapt them, which has been fiction's problem, by the way, or create an allegory that's like them, but also doesn't conform to any one thing. Like create your own, basically. And to me, the people of Nord are basically that allegory. Because we learn from interacting with Gaius' family, with the Wurzels, and by extension the rest of the people of Nord, that the people of Nord are very simple, but they're not preachy about it, and they don't really have mysticism to them, right? I've actually thought about a certain thing Gaius gains in uh, Cold Steel 3, but I realized that Sky 3 actually debunks the idea of that. That is a Gaius power, not a Nord power, if you understand the distinction. And that's all I want to say about that because I don't want to spoil Cold Steel 3 until we get there. But the point in but the case in point here is, for all intents and purposes, the people of Nord live very simple lives. They prefer to be one with nature effectively, right? Essentially. But they don't shirk technology. They're basically not shunning Gaius because he uses the Arcus, for example. And they don't stare down their noses at Class 7 for using the Arcus units. They don't stare at the Erebonian military with their fancy tanks and all that, and they don't stare at them with contempt. I mean, they're more than willing to effectively have their boy effectively hang around a girl who works in shit. I did not write it down. The fortress there that I have forgotten the name of. Please forgive me. And, and but they don't stare down their noses at General Vander. You know, In fact, they're okay with Gaius going into Erebonia. They're okay with him attending Thor's. They're okay with him using the Arcus units. They even have an orbital station in the Elder's house, for God's sakes. Which is kind of the most on the nose you can get. If the orbital charging station in the only orbital charging station in the entire village is sitting in the Elder's house, right? It just goes to show that they do not shirk technology. They don't shy away from technology. They just don't embrace it fully. They don't stare down their noses at those that rely on tech, but they don't and, and but they aren't going to stare down their noses at people who use technology. They just prefer the more simplistic nature of technology. And before somebody corrects me with technology being in the whole human innovation and all that, just don't. You know what I mean when I mean tech. I mean the orbments. I mean tanks. I mean computers. I mean all of that shit. Okay? They don't stare down their nose at machines. And they even have an orbital truck, for God's sakes, right? Also, they're cool with effectively a tech mogul living in a cabin in the northern part of the Highlands, for God's sakes, namely Gwyn, right? More on that a bit later. But it is something that I really do like. It's a very simplistic. It is a very simplistic lifestyle, but it's also meant to kind of show that there are different kinds of people in the world, right? Which was also the point of Estelle and Joshua traveling all over Liberl back in Sky 1, if you remember. So then we get some foreshadowing, shadowing with the statues, which will come up again in Cold Steel 3. And, I mean, giants doing battle. Kinda sounds like Divine Knights, doesn't it? So then we learn about Elisa's mother's other betraying Gwyn, and building the railway guns. Effectively, Gwyn did concede to building the railway guns, but that effectively what made him peace out, what made him resign as chairman of the Reinford Company, because he regretted making the railway guns. Effectively, the problem was the problem that Gwyn had was the only reason you build you are the first ones to build a weapon is to cause escalation. That's the only reason to that in his mind is the only reason to build the railway guns at Gorilla Fortress. The funny thing is, the funny thing is that he doesn't exactly resent Irina for what she did. It's more of just she's disappointed, and he couldn't stay at the company as long as those railway guns were it, were a thing. So he just stayed away. We also then learn about how Lisa is just comfortable around Reen, and is just like, yeah, and is able to talk with them, which is actually really nice. This is also where I should mention that the Cold Steels really try to push issue to have Reen and Elisa end up together. I mean, it is damn apparent, especially if you go ahead and do all the bonding events with Elisa. So then Gideon does what he does something similar to when he attacked us with that baboon monster back in Keldic, and simultaneously launches attacks on both the Watchtower and the Republican base over in Calvard, which effectively causes tensions to rise almost reach a boiling point between between Erebonia and Calvard. And so effectively, General Vander is basically saying, "Yeah, I'm going to ship you out of here. I'm going to send you back to Trista. You need to go. Basically, I need you out of here. Out of here. This is going to get dangerous." And this is when Gaius steps up. Now, it is reckless. This is a reckless act. But again, well, the chain of command exists for a reason. I've always remembered a quote. I believe it's from Mass Effect 2. Yeah, it's from Mass Effect 2. It's I think his name's Bailey, the CSEC dude, where he basically speeds along and re-registering Shepard into the system so that he can get past security, right? And so they can get past security, right? Well, hell, and then Shepard, you can even, I believe you can even have Shepard ask, why are you so willing to just speed this along? And isn't that, against the rules? And Bailey basically says in no uncertain, literally says, I'm all for the rules, except for when it comes to except for when the rules prevent people from doing their jobs. In other words, here's the idea being we need to bend the rules. Now, I do like the Neidhart leaves it as when he lectures Reen in a later scene, leaves it at the chain of command exists for a reason. And Reen saying, I understand, sir. he leaves it at that because he's just like, okay, if you understand that, we're good. Good, right? Because Neidhart understands that, yeah, doing the reckless thing can lead to good things. There's a reason why the Bracer Guild has existed for so goddamn long and has been so goddamn prevalent. Now, if only the frickin' militaries and the Bracer Guild could actually kind of come together on some cohesive whole, that would be nice. Basically, have the Bracers be cops and the military be the frickin' military. But I digress. This is also when Gaius steps up to the plate and effectively says he wants to defend the Highlands. He speaks about his love for the Highlands because effectively he left his home because his classmates effectively ask him, "Why did you leave the Highlands? And why did you leave the Highlands if you love them so much?" And it was simply put, he wanted to expand his horizons. And he's glad he did, because now he's understanding the full scope and he's starting to understand more and more of the true scope and scale of the threat to the Highlands. And considering the end of this, what the end of this game entails, that's saying something. So then we encounter Milliam and get her to temporarily join us. And then we go kick Gideon's ass, who sicks a giant spider header on us, just in order to get away. But we still manage to successfully. Excuse me. We still manage to successfully basically bring in most of his accomplices because the spider ate one. Ugh. And so war gets averted. Yay! I do like how that Milliam is really open with them, even at the beginning, by the way. So then we get a peek of C, who we noticed earlier, and Gideon basically and C basically says, "You've done well, Gideon," and Gideon's just like, "Okay, look, C, hey, that was a complete fucking failure." Failure. And C basically shrugs it off like, well, not really. We haven't been put in a disadvantaged situation. We just aren't in as advantageous of a position as we would have. All in all, we still gain something from this. This is still a Xanatos Gambit. And Gideon is like, well, fair enough. Now I'm going to take my leave. And thus we leave Nord. Nord is definitely one of my favorite chapters, by the way. Definitely a fun chapter. So then we get more into the idea of Laura and Feed being at odds with each other. Then we do some more side quests, including one about Rex, who basically takes pictures of female students without their consent. Now, let's be blunt. No matter what gender the subjects in those photos are, taking someone's picture without their consent is, well, in most places illegal, including here, and is just downright, well, let's just call it what it is, creepy. Creepy. So then we clear the 4th floor of this old schoolhouse, and a red door appears. Huh, that's weird. It won't budge. Okay, let's go and deal with that. Then Elise shows up and basically is showing up because she's concerned about a letter that Green wrote to her, basically saying in no uncertain terms that Green has no intention to become Baron Schwarzer. Now, admittedly, Reen isn't getting it, but Elise is basically boiling down to the same fucking problem that I see way too many people do, even in real life. Failing to understand a very simple concept about humanity. We are not psychic. We can't all read minds. We can't know what's in your brain. We're not betazoids. It's knock the fuck off. Elise basically says, "You don't understand how we feel at all," and then runs off in a huff. That, in my opinion, is really fucking stupid and childish. And I get it, she's a teenager and yada yada yada, but it's just, I would expect that kind of shit from a child in the single digits. I would hope a teenager would be at least be a little more mature to be like, to at least explain, maybe in an exasperated and overly ambitious way, that no, we don't care about the reputation and how it will affect us if you become barren and blah 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 blah. We want you to be barren. But no, instead she has to be like, "You don't understand this is all, and I'm gonna run away and be a dumbass, this and go into the old schoolhouse because I'm a moron." And Patrick's too much of a moron to stop me before I go in. I hate. And that's the other thing that fucking that made me want to smack Reen too. Like, pick a fight with Elise, dude. If anything, he would try to stick his dick in Elise because remember, misogynistic pig. Pig, but whatever. Okay, maybe pig is too far, but he is definitely misogynistic. I'm standing behind that statement. He meant, "Women do not belong on the battlefield." All I'm gonna say is Laura and Instructor Beatrix and move on. Oh, and Instructor Sarah while we're on the subject. And Estelle. And Shara. Hera. And Captain Schwartz. Julia. Julia. I could really honestly keep going, but I think you get my point. I think you get the point. I've already made my point. With that. So then Elise is attacked by a giant sentient, I shouldn't say sentient, but a giant moving suit of armor, which is a pain in the ass to fight. And this is where we're introduced to Reen's ogre power, as they call it. I guess they were worried about Akeisha Aikita suing their asses. Because that looks extremely like the vampire form from Rosario Vampire. I mean, there's a part of me that likes to that if it wasn't for Cold Steel 2 and 3, I would have loved to just quietly headcanon in the idea that Reen was secretly from another dimension and was actually the child of Skune Ano and Mocha Akashia, from Rosario Vampire. Anyways, moving on. So Crow comes in and helps us deal with that because Reen's trying to decides to suppress his power because he's afraid of it. And then we head off to Heimdall. This is where we're introduced to Governor Regnuts officially. We're introduced to Elliot's sister, Fiona Craig. We'll talk about her later. And then we're also introduced to the opera singer, Vita Clotilde, who totally won't become super important to the rest of the series. Nope. Yeah, I know I'm not fooling anyone. So then Laura and Fee have trouble creating the combat link. So Reen decides he's going to pull back heck, and effectively force the issue, because sometimes sometimes you need a dose of cold water. Then we learn about Elliot's past. Again, I'll talk about that more later. Then we learn about Laura's feelings and how she misjudged Fee. Then Fee describes her past as with Zephyr and how she lost them. Loss is a huge part, and then we learn about Machias' past, where he suffered loss. Yeah, loss is basically a reoccurring theme in this, big time. And this is where Machias comes to the realization that he more so hates the noble culture, not so much the nobility itself, which is a point for Cold Steel 3 when we get to the final dungeon, and a particular character's motivations for doing what they do. So then Blue Blanc shows up and spoils the fact that Ouroboros is involved in this. Good job, Blue Blanc, you idiot. So then we're introduced to Princess Alphen, who invites all of Class 7 to a St. Estrella girls' school for tea. And this is where Olivert makes his official debut. And in case you were basically questioning whether or not in case you were still on the fence about whether or not you believed that Prince Olivert was Olivier, he literally comes in strumming a lute. Yeah. No room for doubt after that. Hi, Olivier. How you doing? Then we learn that it was actually Prince Olivert who established Class 7. Heaven. Effectively, again, to become a group that doesn't bow to either the reformist or noble factions. Then we also hear about Osborne's hand in the forcing the Bracer Guild to withdraw. I said this several times on stream, and I'm going to go ahead and explain it here. Osborne effectively only forced the Bracer Guild out of Erebonia, effectively, with the exception of like one branch that we see. You know, there's probably a couple of others, but there's like basically one branch that we see in the entire game. Mostly because he's trying to assert dominant control. See, the problem is asserting absolute control over the country assumes that you can hold on to that power, and nobody, just to use a random example, will be able to snipe you during a speech. Or a national address, if you prefer. Yeah. So then we get Alphen's shtick. With Elise. Encouraging Elise to try to bang her brother. I'm going to save it for when we start talking about the characters individually, which is why I'm just kind of bypassing the pasts and everything. But yeah, my note here just says it all. Your Highness, incest is loose-cest here. It really is. So then Princess Alphen and Elise are kidnapped by Gideon, and thus C and the Imperial Liberation Front and come in after we defeat the Bone Dragon and destroy the Demon Flute. Because C challenges us and basically mops the floor with Reen, Fee, and Laura. Yeah, there's a reason why those three in particular were chosen for C to stand up to show the power. Like I said, Laura is my best character, needless to say. So then C basically officially announces, "We are the Imperial Liberation Front," and basically comes out with a big slogan, their big slogan, which I wrote down in its entirety because I actually love this slogan. Yeah, sure, it's theatrical, but that's actually what I love about it. In our hearts, the flames of silent anger. In our hands, the hammer of judgment that shall topple the dictator. Yeah, it. They claim that it's a high school play thing, basically. I don't know. No, that I would actually argue that's kind of a high end play, but that's just me. But then again, I've also had to deal with Shakespeare, and Shakespeare can just be like, mm, at times. So then after that, at Milliam and Crow join us in Class 7, and we discover that Vita is Misty, and then Gideon leaves the narrative. Now, those that have played the Crossbell games, feel free to correct me. Is the trade conference that Prince Oliver and Osborne go to, and Gideon, like, is Gideon in the Crossbell games? Is basically my question. That is effectively my question, right? Is this a situation like Lowe was back in Sky 1, right? Where he was in Sky 1, it's just we didn't really know it was him until the very end, kind of a thing. Very curious. So then we go to Legram next, which has Laura return to Legram. Points for later. We see the Arcade school, and we are introduced to the Radiant Blade Master, who is easily my favorite of the parent characters. Absolutely. Like, that's not even a question. And man, am I starting to feel hungry. Oof. He is an awesome character, and I love the idea that he is one of the most powerful characters in the setting. It's kind of why Ring gets his ass kicked after asking for a duel. Anyways, so then we deal with Lohengrin Castle, where Emma starts to take center stage. She shows off that she basically has a sixth sense for sensing things. Means she has knowledge of getting past the barriers and everything, and she has knowledge of the Nosferatu, which is the boss, which is a very dangerous boss fight, as I said earlier. And hoo boy. Then a spear of light saves us, effectively us being saved by the Steel Maiden. Keep that in the back of your mind for Cold Steel 3, because that's where it'll become relevant. So then we head to Corellia Fortress, where we meet Elliot's dad, General Olaf Craig, voiced by Sean Schemmel, sadly enough. And this is also where we learn about control units, because effectively they use remote controls, basically a remote control system, to effectively control older tanks that they don't mind destroying, right? So then, in the Imperial Liberation Front, forces control units to need to be installed on all of the new tanks, the Shaozens, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. And then after the tanks start running amok, we catch up with the Flash Forward, which we go further past because the railway guns have blanks as their opening shot, which I have to admit is a plot point that I applaud, because you don't want those things going, some say terrorist getting in and launching one shot that basically causes a war, right? So instead, let's not have them have live ammo in the first shot. But that being said, we do have to stop Scarlet and Vulcan from activating it. Ending it. Which leads to a board meeting where they discuss the idea of whether or not they should even continue with field studies at all. I do like how Olivert is not only there, but is the convincing factor, and he uses the school's motto: "Arise, O youth, and become the foundation of the world." Basically, if you're going to lock them into the classroom, how can they become the foundation of the world? How can they arise for that matter? So then we learn about Toa's concert from the previous year as the group try to come up with something to do for the festival, which leads to them seeing Toa in that outfit, which is oof. Yeah, I'm glad Reen basically said no to that. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the character section. Because Crow is a bit of a perv. So then Sarah decides to give us a rematch, and she thoroughly fights off, and then we're introduced to the Courageous, an RSL class ship designed by Prince Olivert. You know, Prince Olivert's motherfucking pimp hand just doesn't have as much of a ring as Ben Sisko's motherfucking pimp hand, does it? Especially considering that Prince Olivert is white instead of black, which just makes makes all of that just ring hollow and probably idiotic. So I'll just say that it's Olivert's deterrent and move on. Because it is definitely a very nice airship, and it's meant to be and as I said, it's meant to be a deterrent. Right. As I said, because effectively Class 7 and the Courageous are his deterrents. So, yeah. So then we head to Ruhr. I had to do the Sharon active voice thing in Masterine. I'm sorry. That'll give me nightmares. And Crow just chiming in quietly, "Sweet dreams." Man, ever since I discovered that on YouTube, I had to do that on the stream. I had to. So then we do do some missions in the mine, some orbital waves, some stuff to do with the orbital waves. He's for communication and stuff. And then the Provincial Army and the RMP have a standoff, where the Provincial Army basically throw Settle to the wind and bring armored cars into the city. And trying to play it up like it's for the people's protection. You know, I'm reminded of a quote. Actually, do I have my other notebook? Yes, I do. This notebook. Ugh. If you'll forgive my indulgence. What the hell fell? Oh, that fell. Okay. If you'll forgive my indulgence as I flip through an older notebook. Okay, because I need to flip back to here. Oh, yeah, I didn't write down the quote. But effectively, like back when I did my Ruby Volume 3 video, I had basically talked about how I felt like General Ironwood from Rooster Teeth's Ruby is a fucking moron. Because he basically brings an entire army. I called it an invasion fleet, and I stand behind that statement, by the way. Hey, and his excuse for doing so was as the people will feel safe and our enemies will feel our strength. And that's similar problem with the provincial army here because they're failing to understand human nature because it is the exact opposite. The people are going to feel your strength, and your enemies are actually going to feel safe because you're too busy being a moron. But then again, considering the enemy are, spoiler alert, your fucking allies, I guess that's not saying much, is it? Anyways. So then Elisa's caring nature is brought up. 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 And then we go meet with Claire, who's in a cocktail dress. Fee also tags along, which is honestly good because then nobody can. Because then the whole idea of ring banging Claire can be thrown out the fucking window for as dumb as an idea as it is. By the way, that is one criticism of Reen's character that I will admit that I actually understand people having a problem with. The fact that he apparently has so many women wanting him, it does get kind of fucking bothersome. It's actually one of the reasons why Yuna in Cold Steel 3 was such a breath of fresh air because she ends up like despising him. Admittedly for kind of petty reasons, but you know what? It's still better than wanting to frickin' bang him like so many women in this franchise seem to. Which, of course, makes both Elisa and Machias jealous, which I accidentally skipped over Machias' dialogue on this. So while we were enjoying a pleasant evening alone, you were off perusing with a beautiful woman. You lucky son of a... I mean, for shame, Reen! We are here representing the Academy on a field study! And Reen's just like, oh, for the love of God, shut up already. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there laughing my fucking ass off because I fucking love it. So then they talk about the inspection that the RMP is doing, which means that they can launch an attack underneath their noses because of course the RMP is going to be dumb. Like I said, I'm all for rules until they start preventing people from doing their fucking jobs. And no offense, Claire, but you royally fucked up by enforcing the rules so goddamn hard. Again. And Reen, you in Class 7 go this way, we'll go that way. Especially with the provincial army not even being fucking subtle anymore. The fact that armored cars were rolled into Ruhr into the center of fucking town should have been your tip off of that, Claire. Wake the fuck up. Or occasionally look up from your servicing. That's all I'm going to say to that. So then Elisa basically talks about the 4 divisions and how they basically have allegiances to different groups. And then there's the attack on the factory, which Claire chastises Class 7 for. I mean, I literally just complained about this, but oh my fucking god, this is still so stupid. Oh my god. Because her whole point is, see what is happening here and do your best to stay out of it. Claire, how many fucking field studies do you think they've gone on? And how many times have you heard about Class 7 acting in the middle of a crisis? They did this in Celtic. They did this in, they did this in Breahard. Or, well, okay, I guess Breahard doesn't count, but you know, they did this in Celtic. They did this in Heimdall during the summer festival. They did this in Legram. They did this at Guerrilla Fortress. And they just did it here and saved lives while the provincial army was sitting on their asses doing abso-fucking-lutely nothing. Wake the fuck up, Claire. pull your fucking head out of your ass and quit doing the old adage of you must follow the rules and the rules must be followed, especially when it's going to get people killed. You moron. Also known as the prime directive fallacy. Anyways, there's a reason why I don't like military types. Just saying. So then the provincial army blocks off the mine. Like I said, they're not even trying to be subtle about it. This is where I wrote my note about the provincial army's guilt being apparent, because like I said, this is where it stops being subtle. It's so stupid. So then they go and get access to the tunnel after Elisa shows her resolve to effectively come up with a better way to run the Reinford group. So then Crow leaves us for a bit so he can go be C, spoiler alert, as he escorts miners. Then we encounter V again, and we hear about Arngarm, right? So we learn his backstory. Effectively, everybody in the Imperial Liberation Front has a bone to pick with Osborn in one way or another. Whether it's logical or not, at that point, they don't give a shit. Which is understandable, really, when you think about it. So then we defeat V. Then C challenges us again. We actually manage to get the upper hand on C, but then he manages to flashbang his way out, get onto an airship, and then his airship explodes. Which is the ruse that they effectively pull in that Crow pulls for that. So then a ceasefire is declared, which unfortunately means Angelica has to leave. She'll be back. And we'll deal a severe blow to that idiot Duke Ragnar and his stupidity in Cold Steel 2. So then it's back to the festival prep. Yep, we learn that Arc Incel has a member named Ratia, who may or may not be a playable character from the Crossbell games. I'm pretty sure that's her, but I could be wrong. So then, after we do all of that stuff, we got to go and retrieve our concert outfits. Now, Rain, of course, was kind of overseeing them to try and make them less, let's just call it what it is, skimpy. You know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with skimpy, but here's the problem, Crow. The girls of Class 7 don't want to wear skimpy, okay? They don't want to wear string bikinis for your perverted ass. Pull your head out of your ass and make it less as perverted. Come on. At least the final... there's now, granted, I'm pretty sure no matter what design they came up with Emma was just going to be the killjoy for it, but I digress. Honestly, I do love all of the interactions that each of the characters have, depending on who you pick to go with it. I obviously showed off all of them because I wanted to see all of them, if I'm honest. My personal favorites are Laura, of course. If these are too revealing, blood will be shed. Fee, who just it doesn't care how skimpy it is as long as she can move in it. Emma, who's nervous about the outfits because apparently she thinks everything is too skimpy. I'm sorry, that just leans in the direction of prude so hard that it's just like even the lore runner's not that much of a prude. Jesus. And then Gaius basically gets asked if he wants a job of his model. Then there's Grionos, the bird with the lapis lazuli colored fur or feathers, excuse me. Oh yeah, I'm sure that won't be important. Or the fact that if you bring Emma, she freaks out when she hears about a lapis lazuli bird and tries to go track it. Yeah. So then we see the outfits, and I gotta admit, I love the outfits. I still think Emma's being a killjoy. She pulls it off well. Oh, and they're a little more revealing than, say, Laura would choose or the lore runner would choose, but the design itself is actually very tasteful. Tasteful, right? It's meant to bring out the charm of the girls, not put them in skimpy outfits. Toa's outfit, that's skimpy. Like, Jesus Christ, she's literally just wearing a bra and pants, and that's like it. For God's sakes. Yikes, is all I gotta say to that. But these ones are fine. These are actually extremely nice. So then we get the events, which we actually get to play. Gate of Avalon, which is basically just Blade. Super Stallion, which is basically a horse minigame, which is actually kind of fun. Mishi Panic, which is a whack-a-mole minigame, which is kind of nice. There's the Miyabi, which is the tea house, which I actually can bring out some interesting ideas. I didn't show off all of the choices for that one, and because honestly, that was more work than I was willing to put in because there was no real reason for it. We all knew who I was picking, and I mean, I can't show every single thing and reveal every single detail. I'm not Chugga Conroy after all, who I respect a lot. And then there's the Stella Garden, which is actually quite a nice scenery. Scenery. I also love the Laura scene in there. Here. So then the old schoolhouse lights up and starts chiming its bell, which the principal starts claiming that they're about to cancel the rest of the festival. And Class 7 basically says no. No, we've been investigating this thing from the beginning. If we can get through this barrier, let us go do it. Right? And he's like and Principal Van Dyke's like, "Yeah, all right. I'll give you till midnight. Go ahead." Which leads to a very dumb joke from Sarah. No, no, there won't be any concert tomorrow. Because it's after midnight, which means it's technically today. You pulled a technically as a joke, Sarah? What the actual fuck? Come on now. Come on. Oh my god. So we go through the final dungeon, which I really don't like. I'll just be honest. I don't like the Realm of the Great Shadow. Then again, I hate the one from Cold Steel 2 even more so by memory, but we'll see. We'll see, because there may be something that I was missing with that one too, so we'll see what I think when I go through that one. So then we deal with Loa Erebonius, which tests us for a fragment of the Great Power. That's another boss fight I don't like. Ugh, I hate that boss fight so much. I really do. Ugh. So then Reen's sister complex comes in as he shoos Patrick away, which, by the way, this is the only time Reen's sister complex isn't really super annoying. I don't remember it coming up in 2, but it definitely comes up in 3, and it is way more annoying in 3. I mean, maybe with Ash it kind of makes sense, but dude, no. Patrick has at least frickin' tried to pull his head it is really tried to frickin' crowbar his head right out of his fucking ass, right? It's actually why I say the jury's still out on whether or not he's the worst character. Because holy fuck, is he really bad and gives a really bad first impression. Reminds me of Bakugo from My Hero Academia, actually. So then Prince Oliver shows up for the concert, and he has the right idea to effectively just have it be business as usual, effectively to try and help keep the public's hearts at ease, right? Sure, that still means that certain people have to be off doing certain other things, but if they're willing to make that sacrifice, they're willing to make that sacrifice. Specifically, Mueller and Neidhart. So then we have the concert, which is just awesome. Awesome. Which is topped off with the song that I swear is on the Sky 2 soundtrack. Either the Sky 2 or the Sky 3 soundtrack. I'd have to look it up. But, yeah. So Elliot is proud of what they've accomplished. At the beginning of the game, Crow effectively stole a 50 mira coin, from Reen, and effectively gives it back. Reen doesn't like the idea of them effectively being done after that. So he's like, you do know that there was interest on this, right? How much do you think you really owe me after 6 months? And Crow's just like, Jesus, what kind of racket are you running? Well, I mean, there's this certain second year who's taught me a thing or two about making money. So, what do you say? You still owe me? And Crow is just like, the things I do for love. Personally, I think that was a joke, but I don't know. I leave it up to you. So then Prince Oliver effectively starts dancing with his sister and encourages the others to start gaining dance partners, which leads to some interesting pairings. Gwyn and Sharon, because Gwyn is a bit of a pervy old man, and Irina and Carl, Governor Regnitz, which is just and then Sarah and Victor. I have to admit, I actually would not mind that as a pairing, because that pairing, again, purely character wise, because voice actors are voice actor crap is voice actor crap. But yeah, Sarah and Victor, that's a pairing I could get behind. Angelica and George kind of puts my whole idea of Angelica being sapphic into question, because that might mean that she's bi, but I don't know. I've always felt like she prefers the women, prefers women, but because she's good friends with George, yeah, she'll let George have the first dance. I don't really see any sparks between the two of them either. I'm with Reen on that one, to be honest. So this is when I went through all of the dance options. You have Elisa's doubts and hopes for the future. Also, if you pick one of the guys to go bond with, and with Alphen, Elise effectively thinks that Reen is gay. For the record, he's not. As far as I'm aware, he's not. I mean, it would be funny, but it would be kind of funny, and it would probably be good representation because I do think Reen is a good character. But regardless, regardless, although that does play on the whole, I'm not gonna go there. Let's just say that with Reen being gay, it's like that could potentially play on the barrier gaze trope, and would have technically, if not for the fact that this game actually did get a sequel. I'll talk about that later. So then Elliot talks about his strength, Machias' growth, Emma about her guilt, Eustace about stepping out of his dad's shadow, Fee comparing Reen to the Jaeger King, aka her dad, Ed, and talking about how she effectively has two families. Speaking of two, speaking of two families, Erebonia's to Gaius is his second home. Then there's Milliam kind of debating about the two different sides of her and of her being, which I honestly think is just one. I think she's just overcomplicating things, admittedly, but I can talk about that more later. Sarah talks about being from Northumbria, which is a point that will actually come up in Cold Steel 3 more. And then Reen just is super honest. Toa is super adorable. Like, I just love the what that she pulls when you ask her to dance. It's awesome. There's the point about Reen and Crow's friendship, which I'll come back to. Then there's Laura's perspective, which I'll also come back to. Then we find out that Claire is an alumni of Thor's and basically pulls the whole there's going to be a wedge between you guys. There will always be a wedge between you guys. Okay, Claire, real question. Real question. How many of these people do you honestly believe are truly, when they graduate, going to join the incredibly evil Noble faction? Because I'm sorry, the Noble faction has to remove several of its fucking members to be even worth supporting in any respect, in my opinion. In fact, I'm pretty sure most of the nobles just kind of stay neutral, even amongst like the random classmates. Like, Jesus Christ, Claire. Here, can you please get that dick out of your mouth for 5 seconds and think clearly? Ugh. Sorry. It's only one specific one. I'm not calling her a slut. But because she's not. She's just way too devoted to one guy who doesn't deserve her devotion at all, IMO. And if you're wondering who, just remember that she's an Iron Blood. And then Guerrilla Fortress is completely annihilated. Well, there's some tonal whiplash for you, isn't there? And this is where we get into what is literally the finale of the game, right here. Because of the Crossbell Bank putting a freeze on assets, which causes financial crisis in Erebonia. Yeah, effectively everybody's worried about the future of the country. Sarah tells them to play it straight. Then Crow heads off to Heimdall. Oh, which Patrick has to tell us of all fucking people. And then during Osborne's speech, where they're basically saying, we're not going to take this line down, well, that's when it's revealed that Crow is C. And that's when Crow takes his shot. Shoots Osborne. Go finish your speech in hell. Boom! One nice touch that I absolutely love, by the way, Osborne knew it was Crow that got him. Interesting little food for thought. Right. So then Vita allows the entire Thor's school to effectively see what's happening in the capital as basically the noble faction and their hired Jaeger Corps, and with a little assistance from Ouroboros, courtesy of Blue Blanc coming out and basically announcing that Vita is an enforcer of Ouroboros. Soldats the mechs that the noble faction uses, start coming to take over Trista, and by extension, Thor's itself. So the instructors go out to fight the soldats. Of course, Class 7 goes after them, because of course they do. And this is where we learn Sharon is also Ouroboros. She's actually currently employed by them, but it's just right now they don't really have anything for her, so she's free to do whatever the hell she wants. So then we confront Scarlet and her minion, which is the fight against the Draken, which is an irritating fight, the Spiegel, which is a forced to lose fight in the dumbest way possible, and then Reen is basically lectured by Selene, who can talk. Spoilers. That that to call out Valimar, which leads to Valimar showing up. The Spiegel is defeated pretty damn easily. That is a damn easy fight. And then Crow shows up in Ordine, the Azure Knight. So then we get into the Divine Knight battles, which is a rock, paper, scissors format, basically. You have to basically know which limb to attack at any given time, depending on the enemy's stance, to put them off balance, and that's the key to your victory. Which, with Spiegel, there's not really any real... Excuse me. There isn't any real difference, because that is basically just to practice the idea of it. But with Ordine, you really do need to be... You are put to the test, which I do like that it's actually the Spiegel that gets fought first in an actual gameplay fight instead of just Ordine. Ordine can be a pain. I actually failed to fight Ordine on the stream several times, and in my prep for my recordings for the different speeches made by the Class 7 during Reen's escape, just as much. And then Reen makes his escape because Selene, he basically usurps him. I'm not going to like Selene at the beginning of Cold Steel 1, or Cold Steel 2, I mean. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. And then that's it. That is the end of Cold Steel 1. Yeah. But we're not done, because now we have to go... I want to talk about the individual characters now. Now, I'm going to go in recruitment order, although I may have screwed that up in regards to Fee and Emma, admittedly, but we'll see how that goes. In fact, I'm pretty sure I screwed that up now that I'm thinking about it. Was Emma in the first thing? Oh, by the way, if you're wondering how Emma, but speaking of which, if you never, I'll mention this later too. But if you're wondering how Emma never picked up on Vita being Misty, yeah, she doesn't own a radio. I actually checked. She doesn't. So, let's talk about Elliot. Can I just say that I love that his friendship with Reen is there. I love Elliot's friendship with Reen. I love his love of music. His relationship with his sister is awesome. Then there's Elliot's past. Elliot lost his mother to illness. She was a connoisseur of music, and that's where both Fiona and Elliot's love of music came from, was from their mother. And this is where General Craig basically pulls stupid, in my opinion. Now, it worked out in the long run, but it is effectively... He basically did the wrong thing for the right reasons. Or, no, I'm saying this wrong. The right thing for the wrong reasons. That's what I mean. Right? He did the correct thing for the wrong reasons. What he did was correct, but his reasons were just wrong. It was, from a moral perspective, it was wrong. He effectively forced Elliot into a military academy, which led to Thor's because of the music program and yada yada yada. General Craig basically, I guess, wanted the ability to choose, and didn't think, and felt like and didn't want him to lock himself into music, even though that's been his passion since he was a kid. And that's why I say it's the correct thing for the wrong reasons. Because it did help Elliot, but it was for such a stupid reason. Granted, Elliot is happy with the strength that he has gained through that decision, and that's why he's able to look at that with a fresh with a healthy outlook, and why he doesn't resent his dad. He gets embarrassed by his dad, but that's just because his dad's a freaking is a freaking is a freaking goofball outside of combat. So yeah. Then there's Gaius. We've already touched on his love of Nord, and his speech against Patrick. I absolutely love that Nord culture just flows through Gaius. Gaius through the entire thing is a bro. Oh, just through and through. I don't really have much to say about several of these characters, which is why I just allowed myself to go in recruitment order, barring Reen and Crow, of course, as they will be saved for last. But what's funny about Gaius is he is very simple, but that's what makes him a good character. He's not complicated. There isn't a billion things to keep track of with him. What you see is what you effectively get. And that's a good thing, in my opinion, because it allows everything to, well, effectively work in Gaius's favor. He lets the winds and the goddess guide him. And it works for him. It absolutely works for him. Very much so. We've already touched on his family. Erebonia is his second home, and he will fight to defend it. Oh, Billy, will he fight to defend it. And it. Then there's Machias and Eustace. Now, I've already mentioned that these two are basically bicker with each other constantly. And the trap that Machias gets caught in. But what's interesting about it is Machias' past basically colors, it has this one noble effectively be awful. Awful. And I gotta be honest with you, I would pin the blame more on the family than on him. Because, well, Machias' sister committed suicide. And that's all there is to it, really. Which is kind of funny in its own right. Kind of funny in its own horrible way. But he does eventually grow to the point where he now envisions a world where nobles and commoners work together instead of against each other. It's just too bad dipshits like Duke Alberea exist, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, oh, wait, did I say Duke Alberea? Well, yeah, I do mean him. Dipshits like Duke Alberea and Duke Cayenne. Cayenne was the one I was thinking of. But that's beside the point. I've already mentioned the fight with Sarah, and I've already mentioned the coming into their own. And I've already mentioned Rufus and Duke Alberea, his troubled family thing. Eustace is very much a prideful person, but he is effectively somebody who is trying to change the nobility for the better because he sees how broken the system is and how much he needs to change it. He's not going above being unwilling to put up with Machias's bull crap. But he also understands that Machias does have a point, even if his way of expressing said point is kind of dumb. So he's just going to mock him at every turn. So then there's Laura, practicer of the Arseid school's little style of swordsmanship. Laura is very simple. In fact, that's actually one of her big character flaws throughout the entire game, and it's one that she even admits full out is her character flaw. Full tilt, full stop. Her big character flaw, for all intents and purposes, is she is, how do I put this? Her outlook is too narrow. And that's why she's happy that she went to Thor's. She could continue the way to the sword and broaden her horizons at the same time, which actually kind of makes her an ideal candidate for Class 7 when you think about it. Because, again, what do I keep hammering in? The fact that Class 7 is the group that breaks the mold. That's the whole point of that, after all. Her clash with Fee is basically the idea that she believes very strongly in loyalty. Loyalty to your people, loyalty to your school, loyalty to the way of the sword, loyalty to your friends, that kind of thing. And when she heard that Fee was a Jaeger, that was at odds. She felt like that was at odds with, well, the very concept of loyalty, right? Because in her view, the only thing Jaegers are really loyal to is a paycheck. Now, I disagree with that fundamentally, but you could kind of see why Laura would have that perspective. It's because it's a stereotype, right? And stereotypes do not make the people. And nor, in my opinion, is this more prevalent than when during the field study in Legram, because so many people love her because she tries to keep an open mind. She understands that she has weaknesses and she works to overcome them. You know, and that's a good thing. That is absolutely a good thing. Right. And it's kind of one of the reasons why she's one of my favorite characters. So there's that. And I do like that she has a keen perspective. And admittedly, I do like the idea that she promises Reen that she will be Reen's sword, and that sword will not break until she is by his side again, which is awesome. So then there's Elisa. Now, I've already talked about the awkward moment and the apology in great detail, and Sharon for the most part. I want to talk about Gwyn and Irina. Gwyn and Irina are basically the reason why Elisa effectively has such a tough time accepting her mother, effectively. Because her mother betrayed their grandfather, betrayed her own father, and that really rubbed Elisa the wrong way. Effectively, worrying that Irina is going down a dark path and just kind of being a workaholic, right? It's a very similar thing to what I was actually saying with Reen's reaction to Toa, but on a much more extreme basis because holy fuck is Irina a workaholic, right? She does not bypass up any chance. She says, "Oh, you make time. You make time," but it's like, okay, when's the last time you made time for your daughter, Irina? When's the last time you pulled your nose out of work to actually spend time with your daughter? There's a reason why I compared Toa to the lore runner and not you, because you are the shining definition of a workaholic, like Irina. You're even more of one than he is. And that's fucking scary as far as I'm concerned. I've already talked about the railway guns and how that's the whole thing that caused the rift between it caused their family to drift apart. I've already talked about the caring nature and the jealousy, but Elisa's resolve, I like the idea that Elisa understands that, yeah, she sounded pretty confident, but that was heat of the moment. She does believe that one day she will go ahead and she will, show her mother what it means to run the Reinford group properly. It's just she kind of needs to find that answer before or she can do that. And she hopes that it'll all work out in the end. Then that leads us to Fee, who's a former Jaeger. I like the idea that Fee's clash with Laura is more about a clash of ideals rather than a clash of of viewpoints, right? Because again, it's more of a lack. The only reason that they aren't able to form a combat link is that they don't fully understand, the ideals of the other fully, and that is causing them to not be able to form the link. But once they lay everything bare, their reasons and their past, their Laura's reasons and Fee's past, well, that changes substantially, doesn't it? Laura learns that Fee does have a sense of family, does have a sense of loyalty, and that Class 7 effectively is their new family, which allows Laura's and Fee's link to link up, and allows those Fee to cement the idea of Class 7 being a second family. Then there's Emma. Emma's backstory is one that I'm not going to go ahead and reveal too much about right now, but let's just say she is related to Vita, and that does she kind of acts like she's he, effectively she tries to show everything off as much as she can because she feels guilty about having to keep so many secrets. The fact that she kind of understands the idea of the armor that attacked Elise, the idea that she kind of understands what Reen's power is, the fact that he has her suspicions about the old schoolhouse, the fact that she knows what's going on in Lohengrin Castle, etc., etc. Hell, even her connection with Vita, which is hinted at several times if you explore her character arcs, or her bonding events, excuse me. It actually does make Emma out to be a very interesting character. But again, much like certain RPGs, especially Fire Emblem, for example, you basically have to go digging for it to really see it. Because there's not too much of that in the actual narrative. Then there's Millium. Now, it's interesting that Millium is the most willing to expose information. Because effectively, she doesn't really know how to keep a lid on it. Now, it is of my opinion that there isn't anything too sensitive that she is allowed to be in on, in regards to what she lets slip. Now, the reason I say that is because, well, simply put, Milliam effectively grows to like Class 7. She enjoys her time as a member of Class 7. Heaven. It's an awesome time, but the problem is she's still loyal to the Ironbloods. And this will play heavily into her character arc in Cold Steel 3. Because while I don't approve of her decision in 3, I understand her decision in 3. I just don't think it was the correct move. Or the right one, for that matter. Excuse me. But then again, what would have been the right call in there? Now, her loyalty to the Ironbloods is shown with her relationship with Lecter and with Claire, and her talking about her mission. During the final bonding event, which is the dance, she talks about not knowing who her true self is, the student or the agent. And to be honest with you, I agree with Reen. I believe it's both. A mixture of the two. Not unlike Weiss Schnee, for example, from Ruby, to use another example. And of course, when she's helping Reen escape, that's the first time she's fighting for something that she wants, not that she was ordered to do by Gramps or by Lecter. But let's get to the largest section by far, Reen and Crow. Let's start with Reen. Let's start with Reen, first of all. I've already talked about the awkward moment. Then there's the 50 Mira coin. I do like it as a symbol of his friendship with Crow. It's actually kind of a nice way to segue into the idea that he has his doubts, right? That's actually what he tells Laura. Sorry, I need to adjust my headset here. That's what he actually tells Laura in Keldek, right? That he has doubts, and that's what actually led, that lack of self-confidence is actually what led to him, effectively stopping working with, learning under Master Yung Kafai. As I mentioned on the stream to Noct, Annalise's grandfather from the Sky Games, right? Because the very notion, and because the very nature of it effectively was just cut short because he was still doubting himself and he wasn't willing to embrace his power. The 50 Mira coin, to go back to that, effectively represents, hence the idea, that Crow gives him something that can be a constant, something that he can effectively depend on. The problem is, well, therein lies the rub, doesn't it? The fact that, the fact that, well, Crow double crosses them, which just makes the guilt all the more uncertain. So I've already mentioned the tutor side quest. I've already mentioned class 1 versus 7. Let's talk. I also mentioned Elise. Again, like I said, I really don't like the sexual tension between Elise and Reen. Okay. Let's talk about let's actually address that. Let's go ahead and talk about that. So why is it I keep saying incest is lucest in this case? And why the hell do I keep saying, am I okay with Estelle and Joshua, but not Reen and Elise? There's two very simple reasons for that. Time and perspective. In the case of Estelle and Joshua, as I said during my Sky videos, if you think Estelle and Joshua is still creepy, okay, fine. Go, it's fine. That's fine. I heavily disagree with that, but whatever. That's one thing, right? Because that all gets into the blood relations and family and all of that. I've always believed that family is chosen, right? The idea being that you choose effectively how your family is what to you. Now, there obviously are some exceptions, but I've always believed that very, very strongly. It's actually one of the reasons why I respect Lore so much, because he has that concept too, that family is chosen. My parents are my parents. They're not exactly my family, if you catch my drift. No, my family, in my blunt opinion, are Matt and Steve. I'm not trying to say that my parents are awful, it's just, when I think of my family, that's who I think of. The problem is that that's exactly the point when it comes to Reen and Elise. Reen sees Elise as his little sister, but the problem is he's so overprotective that even Sedith from Fire Emblem Three Houses is looking at Reen and going, dude, chill the fuck out. For those not in the know, Sedith is a very protective person over his sister, Flayn. But I digress. I do like that Reen is seen as capable, as competent, though. because Reen ends up sniffing out Blue Blanc, which is very nice. Nice. And of course, his duel with Viscount Arcee to try and help him quail his doubts, which is a very nice touch. I've already mentioned that. Then there's the Realm of the Great Shadow, which I already talked about, it being a test for Reen that Class 7 participates in. Now, let's get into something before I really start talking about Crow. Because the whole idea of Crow being C only works if you buy the friendship between Reen and Crow. So, honest question: do you buy the friendship between Reen and Crow? Keeping in mind that I basically went through all of the bonding events. Do you actually buy them as good friends that would feel that level of where Reen would be justified in feeling that betrayed at the end? Because he literally snaps at him as if his longtime friend is suddenly saying, you know, yeah, I'm a politician murdering madman, right? And none of our time together has meant anything to me. Now, I think it did matter to Crow, but I honestly do think it still rings a little bit hollow. And that's mostly just because Crow joins Class 7 too late. He joins literally, and I mean this sincerely, literally 2 field studies before the end. Two. Literally 2. And you only actually have him literally playable outside of the old schoolhouse for one of those field studies. So you'll forgive me if I feel like the very idea of their friendship being tarnished by this rings a little hollow for me. But what's funny about C is that it makes perfect sense that he would hate on Osborn. Now, we don't actually know his reasons, but it does feel like that's the whole point. That effectively that he did go ahead and befriend and Reen basically just to, and then Toe and Angelica and George, all just for the sake of deceiving everyone so that he could be C. I do actually think that he's lying there, but that's mostly just because of the hesitation, where he's like, because he's like, I dot dot dot, and then the next text box is yeah, I'm afraid so. Interesting word choice, and I didn't hear it in the Japanese version, but he does kind of breathe in and is like, yeah, I believe yeah, I'm afraid so. And he kind of says it almost reserved, which is kind of interesting in its own right. Then there's the fact that he's been a Divine Knight, pilot of a Divine Knight for 3 years. Yeah. Which means the skill was just too much. Reen did well, but he's going to need more if he's going to defeat Hidordine. Yeah. So then Reen makes his escape. Everybody has their moments at the end. And then Reen departs. At Celine's word, because Celine is the master of Valimar, apparently. Wait, what? But regardless, that's it. There's one last thing I want to talk about, however. I was originally going to talk about how the C twist didn't work for me, but that was just I needed to see it again to really get at the full scope of it. And yeah, no, the C twist actually does work, in my opinion, right? I do think the final chapter kind of goes on a little too long, admittedly. Like, I think you could have literally done the dun 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 to be continued at Guerrilla Fortress being destroyed, but I digress. But regardless, let's talk about the very nature of cliffhangers now. I mentioned this back in Sky 1, how if Sky 1 had ended right, if we had never gotten another Legend of Heroes game and we just got Sky 1, it would have been a disappointing, it would have been a cohesive, maybe satisfying, maybe not, end. Like, it still would have felt like a complete story. This this feels like a deliberate to be continued, and Cold Steel 3 actually pulls this too. Although Cold Steel 3 actually had the common courtesy to literally say to be continued. Continued, so shrug. See, the problem with video game cliffhangers is if that cliffhanger isn't fulfilled or is followed up very poorly, then it kind of taints the very nature of the cliffhanger. But this one was followed up on, and so we don't have to worry. We don't have to paint this as a Half-Life 3 scenario. And I'm thankful for that. But that's it for me. So, oh, apologize for the long and rambling thoughts I've had. Am I reading that right? Oh my god, I've been sitting here for 3.5 hours yapping about this game. I really like this game, can you tell? Well, I've only been sitting here for 3.5 hours yapping about it, and I'm already late for my stream because of that. So I'm going to chop this off. And I am going to say, see you next. See you next time. And I'll see you for Cold Steel 2, which might be a smaller video, might be a longer video. I don't know. We'll see. Till then, Blue Wolf Alex of the Lore Walker signing out. Have a good one.